nice to have you with us tonight.
Thanks.
Why is China at this torrid pace of testing? What's happening here?
Well, I imagine that they are spurred on by the fact that both the US and Russia are also upping the ante with developing new kinds of nuclear weapons. As we know, the US has $1 trillion budget for nuclear weapons and is talking about so-called low yield, and Russia is talking about these undetectable missiles. So China is feeling a little bit threatened, perhaps, and that could explain this ramping up.
Are we in an arms race, a global arms race? There's 3 superpowers in the game.
Well, there are definitely 2 superpowers in the game. I mean, numerically, obviously, Russia and the US have about 7,000 nuclear weapons each. China has, by all estimations, we don't know exactly, but probably around 270. They're talking about using this testing program to ramp up another 100. That doesn't seem to be, you know, if you buy into deterrence at all, very competitive with those 2 major superpowers. So I think this is much more about posturing, about the ability to show that we're developing a nuclear arsenal, and it makes them, seem more secure, but in reality, it doesn't change anything.
Are they technologically advancing faster than the United States and Russia? How good are the Chinese at this?
That I really don't know. I don't have that kind of inside information, but I would say that given where they're at compared to Russia and the US, it's unlikely. But it really doesn't matter in the end, because how many you have and how advanced they are. I mean, we've talked about this before, that everyone's already got plenty of nuclear weapons to destroy the world many times over, so there's really no need to develop new ones or more weapons.
Are these first strike capability weapons you think they're testing and getting to that level, or is it more of a defensive measure and a reactionary?
According to China, there is no intent to use them as first strike. It's always been about a retaliation, but that rather sort of undermines the whole premise of so-called deterrence. Are you going to actually use them, or are you just going to threaten to use them? If you're never going to use them, are they really a weapon at all? Is there any point? Obviously, I don't think we should have any nuclear weapons, so it makes it all kind of futile, but it's just this kind of jockeying for some sort of position to say, well, we could retaliate if we needed to, but by then it's basically over.
Where is the U.S. development on nuclear weapons right now? Is it at low yield, minimal strikes, but effective? And then, of course, Russia has stepped forward with an undetectable capability. I mean, this is really a new wave in the game, isn't it?
Well, first of all, low yield is sort of this misnomer. It sounds like it's sort of harmless and not as dangerous, and we're talking about 44,000 times a traditional bomb in terms of the explosive yield of one of these so-called low-yield nuclear weapons. I was just listening to Senator Ed Markey the other night, who said, low yield is like in Salt Lake City nightlife. I mean, it just doesn't exist. It's an illusion to think that somehow you can fight a war with nuclear weapons at all, and certainly with low yield. I mean, the explosive power is enormous. The damage would be immense. And China's talked about, needing them to sort of blow out a whole fleet of aircraft carriers. I mean, you don't need to use a nuclear weapon to do that. All these countries have more than enough conventional power, really, to solve, hopefully there aren't any conflicts, but solve conflicts without resorting to nuclear weapons.
And how long has China been at this pace? Has this been recently, since Trump came in and increased the budget?
Yes, I mean, my understanding is a relatively recent development. Of course, we don't know always a lot that comes out of China. They keep things pretty close to their chest, so it's hard to know for sure.
Vladimir Putin received over 2 million questions and took about 4 hours to answer all of them. Now, these questions were over an array of topics such as domestic issues from taxation, healthcare, salary, but the main points were in the questions that focused on international issues, like Russia's relationship with the U.S. Now, when Vladimir Putin was asked about sanctions, he said that the reason for these sanctions was to inhibit the economic growth of Russia because it produced a threat to the Western countries.
Those who applied deterrent measures on the development of Russia do it because they see Russia as a threat, that Russia is becoming an opponent.
Now, when one person asked how close the bad relationship between Russia and the United States was taking the world to World War III, Putin responded with a quote from Einstein.
You know, you can recall Einstein's words. He said, "I don't know with what weapons World War III will be fought, but World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones." Understanding of the fact World War III may be the end of modern civilization must deter us from extreme actions on the international scene.
Now, President Putin stressed the need to restrain world powers from taking dangerous steps. He said that nuclear parity is the only way to maintain world peace, and that by the U.S. pulling out from numerous anti-ballistic missile treaties, it's bringing the world closer to war, and that Russia would actually have to respond in kind. He also said that international tensions would not end until countries start treating each other like equals, respect for the differences of interests of all countries across the earth, and that only then, only with this paramount point would civilization be completely protected from the threat of a third world war.
The United States military has had a lot of experience in the Western Pacific taking down small islands.
A not-so-veiled warning to China to halt its military buildup on contested islands in the South China Sea. Satellite photos show China has placed new surface-to-air missiles in the Spratlys and recently landed nuclear-capable bombers on Woody Island. China calls the accusations ridiculous. Defense Secretary Jim Mattis will reassure allies the U.S. will not allow China to spread its influence unchecked.
There had been a promise in 2015 by the President Xi, where he stated they would not be militarizing the Spratly Islands. We have seen in the last month they have done exactly that.
At a change of command ceremony in Hawaii, the outgoing head of U.S. Pacific Forces, Admiral Harry Harris, a China hawk, issued another warning.
China remains our biggest long-term challenge. Without focused involvement and engagement by the United States and our allies and partners, China will realize its dream of hegemony in Asia. We should cooperate with Beijing where we can, but stand ready to confront them where we must.
The U.S. has stepped up operations to counter China, sending naval vessels near those contested man-made islands this past weekend. And Mattis announced he is changing the name of U.S. Pacific Command, or PACOM, to Indo-PACOM, a shot across the bow at China, which feels threatened by rival India. The latest U.S. military move serves as a backdrop to potential North Korea talks.
Our 27-year holiday from history is over. Great power competition is back.
Document dubbed Proposal for U.S. Permanent Presence in Poland by the country's defense ministry was leaked online at the weekend. The main aim also lists for such a force on its soil is deterrence to Russia's increasingly emboldened and dangerous posture in Europe. Warsaw is ready to pay as much as $2 billion for the deployment of a permanent U.S. military contingent and hopes that will send a clear message to Russia of U.S. protection and support for its Eastern European allies. The documents, leaked about a month ahead of the NATO summit in Brussels, contain detailed maps of the locations where Poland is ready to host U.S. troops. Cities in the heart of the country are said to be the ideal location. Last week, the U.S. Senate called on Defense Secretary Jim Mattis to report on the feasibility and advisability of permanently stationing U.S. forces on Polish soil. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov noted that Poland had a sovereign right to establish a US military base on its territory, stressing that Moscow, in turn, was ready to react to NATO's expansion.
That would not improve security and stability in Europe. Of course, it is a sovereign decision of any country, but the consequences for the general atmosphere on the continent are obvious.
Russian officials added that the deployment of NATO's permanent base makes Poland one of the main targets in case of a possible conflict. NATO has been beefing up its presence in Eastern Europe and the Baltic states, with Moscow regularly portrayed as the aggressor. In March, Poland signed a $4.75 billion deal to buy US air defense Patriot missile systems, while claiming it wants to have friendly relations with its neighbors. Moscow has repeatedly stated that by boosting Western missile defenses on Russia's doorstep, NATO risks undermining regional security.
China is stepping up efforts to build up its nuclear arsenal. According to the Chinese Academy of Engineering Physics, scientists in the country carried out 200 experiments to simulate the extreme physics of a nuclear blast between September 2014 and December 2017. Compare that with the United States, which carried out just 50 such tests between 2012 and 2017. The Academy says China's nuclear scientists are in overdrive. In the last 3 years, they've performed more simulated nuclear tests than their US counterparts have in the past 15 years. They have been conducted here, in the mountains of Mianyang in southwestern Sichuan province. Locals say loud blasts from these experiments can be heard more than once a week. China's goal is to develop a stash of nuclear weapons that can rival those of the US and Russia. But as you can see, right now China's stockpile is only a fraction of what those countries have. When it comes to actual live nuclear tests, the US is far ahead. While an international ban has prevented such testing since 1996, before signing, the US had conducted more than 1,000 live nuclear blasts, whereas China had carried out just 45. But experts say the technology, such as simulating a nuclear test through a gas gun, is what could give it an advantage in the development of future weapons. These new weapons are considered more usable in performing tasks like destroying an underground bunker while generating little radioactive fallout. China says it will never be the first country to deploy nuclear arms, but that, like other countries, it needs its own stockpile to guard against potential threats.